says I'm live, although the video seems to be a little laggy on yeah, is my preview live? I'm not sure. Alright, it says I'm live. Alright, I'm just gonna go ahead, although the video for some reason is behind where it should be, like way behind, more so than usual I should say. Alright, so welcome to the Humane Mind Live, episode 132. Is this the first video on my new place? No, I did one last week, right? Yeah, with the new establishment. Again, still not sure where I want the full desktop setup, and my room is a bit of a disaster zone. had most everything packed away, and then I couldn't find my razor, so I basically was sorting through all that stuff over the weekend, just opening boxes and looking, and like, did I put it in here? Where? Because there was no, apparently, once it got towards the end, there was no rhyme or reason to. I was just like, I just tired and need to get this done, and everything's just going into a box, whatever box has space. So, and then those were the last boxes I ended up packing, and those were the last boxes that apparently ended up getting, the first boxes that were put away, and so I was digging through them in reverse order trying to find. Anyway, so there are boxes scattered all around, and I'll have to find time this week to put them up. But it always seems to be something, right? Okay, so the main story for today's episode is besides me rambling about my apartment and all that, anyway, is Slow Joe's Bizarre Dementure. Pretty proud of that title there. So there's actually three sections of that, and one of the more recent one just happened over the last, like, say, hour or two, or at least I was just found out about it about 2 hours ago, and Styx made a video on it, and I was like, oh, that's pretty significant, that should go in here. I don't have a video clip queued up for it, but I'm not really going to be talking about a video necessarily, because the topic of the story is pretty obvious. And then we've got Neo Shi. Oh, it's a pretty interesting topic there. Maybe that name doesn't make sense now, but it will once I start talking about the topic. Solid taco versus liquid taco. I'm not. Yeah, that I could have done better on that, but I am not sure how I wasn't aware of this before. So these are kind of older clips, but I thought it was really cool. We've got High Quality H2O, which is a video clip I found, I don't know, sometime last week, like Friday or Thursday or something like that. And I'm like, that is really cool, and it makes a situation, makes a tech revolution that I have been, it's not fanatic, that's not the right word, but that I have been, that has been on my radar, that I've been tracking, and I've been trying to, I guess, promote as much as I can. It's a pretty significant technological advancement. So I'll be talking about that. And then the ending clip is a very inspirational clip. So it was kind of the intention originally behind the ending clips, was to have them be inspirational or uplifting type stuff. But kind of over the past few weeks, it's been kind of more like, oh, that's really cool. But this is back to the kind of the original intention of have it being that, yeah, go out on a positive note type clip. So found one this week, and the reason it kind of went to, hey, that's just really cool, is because the good stories and all that sort of thing are unfortunately in short supply at the moment, because everybody's focused on negativity and all of that. But trying to end on positive notes. Okay, so let's just get into these. So here's the first video clip I've got queued up.
1.2 billion. So you go ahead and you stack spaghetti sauce at a store and in a supermarket. You control the guy or the woman who brings out the carts on a forklift. What happened?
Yeah. So That is something Joe Biden actually said. And this is just Freedom Tunes making animations to go along with it. Like, sure, that's what he's talking about. Uh, what? Those were words. That was a sentence. I don't nobody. I don't know if you were supposed to be able to follow along with what he was talking about there. 12 billion what? What I don't like even knowing the context of it. If you watch the speech, you're like, what 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 was that about? It still makes no sense even in the topic is this is just kind of it's one ramble into another, and you're like, okay, 12 billion, and you're stacking spaghetti cans. Wait, why are you stacking spaghetti cans? Do you work at the? Let's play this again.
1.2 billion. So you go ahead and you stack spaghetti sauce at a store and in a supermarket. You control the guy or the.
Okay, you 1.2 billion. I think that might have been relevant. Like I'm trying to remember the exact if that was talking about jobs or if that was money. I am not. I don't quite know. Well, it can't be jobs. It's got to be money, right? 1.2 billion. But then he says 1.2 billion. You're stacking spaghetti cans. You're in control. It's like, wait, so the people who are at the grocery stores and who are making the displays and who are stocking the shelves, they're in control?
The woman who brings out the carts on a forklift.
Brings out the carts on a forklift. Wait, what?
What happened?
You're stacking spaghetti cans. You're in charge of the woman who brings out the carts on a forklift. Man, I guess I need to go around stacking spaghetti cans because that's how you get control. I don't. Yeah, the 1.2 billion. I know that's like money, but I'm not sure what that was. Was it talking about the spending bill? I don't think so. I don't know what exactly that's like. Like I said, even if you watch the full context, you're like, what? What did any of that have to do with what the conversation or what the topic was? It just seems out of nowhere the whole way through, and you're just like, I know it's somewhat related to people who have to work during COVID. That's about it. I don't know what that was supposed to mean in any way, shape, or form. So that was his first kind of mess up earlier this week. And then we get this, Jim. This one is amazing.
What you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community.
What? What you all know, but most don't. Okay, most don't know that unlike the African American community, Latinos are diverse. What? Okay, first, who doesn't know that the Latino community is diverse? Who thinks they are a monolith? Racists. Racists think that Latinos are all the same, or they have like some kind of. There's common cultural aspects that overlap. You get quinceañeras and Cinco de Mayo and stuff like that, and a lot of Hispanic food from whether you're from Honduras or Brazil is very similar to each other. I mean, everything's a taco or a burrito or something along those lines. Although Brazilian restaurants, if you go to those are freaking amazing. It's the ones that I've been to. It's just meat on skewers, and then they come around and just meat and more meat. Oh, so it's amazing. That's how all restaurants should be, in my opinion. But that's just me. But even when you go to the cultural differences of just individual countries, there are vast differences from, say, Chile to Venezuela. I mean, especially when you consider Venezuela is falling apart and, suffering starvation because they went communist and all that sort of stuff. But just their historical background is different. Their cultures are different. There are similarities amongst those cultures, but it's like, yeah, who would think that all of these different cultures are the same? Some of them have very different religions. Like, not most of them. I mean, actually, there's huge Catholic communities within the Latino community, but there's also people who, like, their background or whatever, or their historical family. Like, if you think about like Hispanic or Latino religions, you think Quetzalcoatl, you think the Aztecs and the Mayans and things along those lines, and you're like, wait a minute, they've got that in their background, but that's also it's in South America where there's that giant statue of Jesus, right? Because there is a very large Catholic community that is in South America. It's pretty rampant. That's also it's also in South America where they had, what was that called? The painting that was butchered. What was that called? I gotta look that up real fast. I forget the name, what they dubbed it. Oh, the fresco of Jesus. That was it. Okay, let me pull up the image. So, is this it? Yeah. Okay. So, on the left is what it used to look like. This is after the restoration. Oh, man. Oh. So this is what left is what it was, and it got kind of ruined or whatever. And this was the attempted restoration. Yeah, that was in South America. The other thing is, okay, you've also got Latino gang communities like the MS-13 and that sort of stuff, but you also, again, you have immigrants to America that love America, that want to see, that they came to America to succeed. These are business owners. They're living the American dream. Wife, 2 kids, house with a picket fence and a dog, and owning their own business. And you've got those, and it's, nobody thinks that, oh, there's Latinos who are in, MS-13 is heavily Hispanic, so all Hispanics are like that. It's like, but apparently that's what Joe is saying, is most people don't know this, that the Latino community is widely diverse. And it's like, who doesn't know that? Who is thinking that there is one way to be Hispanic? What? But the more disturbing part is he said, unlike the African American community, with very few exceptions. And you're like, he's saying all black people think and act the same. I don't know how you can read that any other way. But then apparently he made a tweet saying something like, "Oh, it was never my intention to say that the black African American community was a monolith." And I was like, "But you said that. How else was that sentence supposed to be interpreted? You could have just said, most people don't know that the Latino community is diverse." And it's like, well, that's not really true. Most people do know that. Most people realize that. Everybody's an individual. A lot of people don't think along racist lines and don't think that everybody who is a certain race thinks and acts the same. Nobody's going to say all Asians act the same. No, unlike most people, this, but most people don't know this, that Asians are a very distinct, a very diverse community. If somebody said that, you'd be like, what the hell is wrong with you? What kind of racist are you? Because Japanese and Korean people, very different. Yes, they look very similar. They're very, and you can say Chinese, Vietnamese, and I've seen this, there is a definite attitude towards honor. like not disrespecting the family or not bringing shame to the family. But if you, yeah, that's very common across a lot of Asian cultures. And when Asians from other cultures come here, but then again, Indians are also from Asia, very different in their history, their attitudes. But if you talk about just Asians as far as like Oriental, Chinese very different from Korean, Korean very different from Vietnamese, Vietnamese very different from Filipino. There are overlaps, but there are huge distinctions. I mean, this is one of the a lot of people just say Chinese food when they're talking about Oriental food, but there's definitely a distinction between Chinese food, which is normally like stir fried or teriyaki, and then, or sorry, no, stir fried with soy sauce, not necessarily teriyaki. But Japanese food, that's where you get your sushi and your sashimi and a lot of teriyaki base. And then Korean, um, that's more of the well, they're more known for Korean barbecue, which is and then there's Mongolian barbecue, which kind of says it's from the name. It's in the name, but a lot of places will kind of throw that in on top. But if you go to a place that has sushi and sashimi, a lot of the dishes there are more Japanese style. If you go to a place that actually has good bulgogi and Korean barbecue, a lot of the dishes you'll find there are very similar with Koreans, and Koreans also focus on kimchi and so spicy foods, but and that type of Korean barbecue that is, and then with Chinese food, it's more along the lines of rice dishes and stir fries. That's the more popular with those. I mean, all of them kind of have rice in there, but the idea of mixed vegetables and all that sort of thing, that's more Chinese cuisine. Whereas Koreans, it's a lot of meat dishes mixed with vegetables and some kind of sauce, and then plain white rice along with it. With Vietnamese, a lot of their dishes are soups, or very soup-like, Vietnamese pho, or yeah. And like even that's just the cuisine you're talking about. There's also the difference in history, and if you're talking with a Japanese person, there's a difference in accent. I mean, completely different language. But it's also if you're talking with somebody who's Japanese and you accuse them, you say, "Oh, I thought you were Korean, or I thought you were Chinese, or if you insinuate something like that, he might feel disrespected by that because there is somewhat of an animosity between Japanese people and Koreans and Chinese, and all for the most part, the three don't get along well. And especially it's more so significant between Japan and China because they were always kind of at war, and China's always trying to take over Japan and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of animosity between their cultures. Koreans and Japanese, not so much, but Koreans and Chinese, kind of the same thing. Koreans are, very angry at the Chinese because the Chinese kept trying to go to war with them and take them over and that sort of thing. I mean, even with Koreans, there's a huge difference in culture and huge amount of diversity just between South Korea and North Korea. It's the idea that all of these groups are they're just all kind of homogenous monoliths. I'm like, the only people who think that are racists, and that I can't believe that so many people that are on Democrats are supporting Joe Biden are looking at this statement like, oh, that's just it was a minor flub or something like this. It shows what he thinks about these other cultures, these other races. It shows his mindset towards people who aren't white. It's like, oh yeah, there's plenty of diversity in white people. I mean, you've got your rednecks who, live out of trailers and do meth and, and fantasize about having sex with their sisters or something like that. And then you've got your, your New York business guys like Trump and, what's his name? Gordon Gekko from Wall Street. And then you've got your rural, kind of more the hillbilly types who, like, maybe not necessarily, they don't fit the trailer trashed, common farmer yokels who don't know much about anything other than taking care of animals and growing crops. And then you've got your, your West Coast lumberjack guys. It's like those types of individuals. There are black people who act like hillbillies, or would be considered rural farmer types. There are Hispanics that act like that because that's the community they grew up in. This is not race-based. This is not ethnicity-based. It is cultural basis. Different cultures are going to have it. And there's all kinds of overlap between all these. The only people who don't see these distinctions are racist. And I think Joe Biden shows himself to be that more and more. This is something that's been throughout his career and things that he was saying, and a lot of people were saying this is very similar to what he said, like if you don't know who to vote for, you ain't black. But also when he said, the poor kids are just as talented as the white kids. Yeah, all these things kind of, they show what he's actually thinking. A lot of people have been calling them gaffes, but I think the more appropriate term for them would be Freudian slips. Things that you say that show your true understanding or your true intentions, your true mindset. Things that you didn't mean to say, but they show you they expose you for who you are. That's a Freudian slip. It's when you say one thing, but you want to do your mother. That's a joke. That's not an actual Freudian slip. That it's a joke to point out what a Freudian slip. Never mind. It's not worth bothering. But sometimes when you say something, your subconscious, it's the idea that your subconscious says the truth, and your tongue will say what your subconscious says is the truth, even when you meant to say something that was a lie. That's a Freudian slip. Or something that you think the answer is one thing, or you're like, oh, I'm caught, this is my problem. Obviously, but you say something that is separate from what you intended to say, because it's like, I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but if you were having a discussion and somebody is saying, all whites are the problem or something along those lines, but then they say something like, I think that's, no, I'm trying to come up with a good example, but it's very hard to come up with a Freudian slip. But you'll see it a lot when you're talking with Marxists and with socialists. They'll say something that they think is innocuous, or they'll say a sentence and they throw in an extra word there that changes the meaning of the sentence, and you're like, I picked up on that word. Why did you use that word? And they're like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. And you're like, are you sure you didn't mean to say that? Because you said that, and at the time, you didn't notice it was different from what you intended. Because a lot of times when there's a Freudian slip, the person saying it doesn't catch it. They think they said a sentence without the extra word or without the word changed. In their minds, it came across as the sentence they wanted to say. But everybody else hears them say the sentence modified with the extra thing that shows their true belief or their true intention, and they don't catch on. And then when you point it out, you're like, but you just said this thing. And that changes everything. That shows and exposes you for what you really believe, what you really are. So that's when I think all of these gaffes is what people are calling it, or accidental slips, or whatever. Those are Freudian slips. They show that what he really thinks about race, when he doesn't realize he's supposed to be political, or he's supposed to be giving a more not discerning. He's supposed to be giving a very polished answer, but his mind is obviously slipping. There's a bunch of clips of that. And they compare, Trump has a campaign now comparing Joe Biden on the campaign trail with Obama versus his own presidential campaign, and it's night and day. the Joe Biden from Barack Obama, when Joe Biden's VP and he's out there and he's giving speeches, he's making coherent statements. He's making very long sentences that all make sense in a row. I mean, there is no stumbling. There's no gaffes. I disagree with his positions and his points, but they make sense the whole way through. It's a coherent thought, and his thoughts build on one another and follow through. He can form complete thoughts and complete sentences, and he can build an argument starting from a point, building on that point, and reaching a conclusion. You can see that in his was that 2008, right? Wait, no, 2006. Let's see. Wait. All right, because Trump won in 2016, so it would have been 2012. Yeah, 2008. So I mean, I don't know if Biden probably was doing speeches in 2012 as well, but it was less important because the Democrats were gonna win again with Obama as their front man and just as the incumbent president. But it was during 2008 that Biden as VP was a very important pick, and what he said and did was pretty pivotal to Barack Obama's campaign, and he did his job. He said the Democrat talking points, was on point, understood, was able to have somebody respond back to him, wasn't getting angry, was actually downplaying the situation, was de-escalating it. But now somebody just comes up to him and asks him a question, and immediately he jumps on that, look here, fat, you're a lying dog face pony soldier. Those sorts of things. It's like feels like he's attacked or threatened, and I forget who mentioned this. It was somebody was talking about this. Is like somebody with it might have been Crowder or I don't know if it was Dinesh D'Souza or there's too many other people who have commented on the situation with Joe Biden. But if you look at the way he reacts when somebody questions him or treats him without kid gloves, when somebody asks him a question that is somewhat hostile or can be perceived as hostile, he reacts and retaliates. And again, I forget who was commenting about this, but he says it's very similar when somebody who has a delusion, like someone who is actively at a mental health facility, when you tell them that what they're saying is crazy, or you say that can't be true, whatever, they have violent episodes. They react and just, they get angry and enraged because how dare you try to break their delusion. And the other thing is it's not just people that are in insane asylums, but it's also very common with people who have dementia and Alzheimer's, where they see somebody, or they're not familiar with somebody, or they're not like, they're nice and calm and normal, and then something happens and they're like, I don't know what's going on. They freak out and they get angry and they start thrashing around and that sort of thing. They can be a danger to themselves and others. And while Biden hasn't physically charged somebody, the verbal attacks are definitely there, and that shows it. So I don't think he's gone and crossed over that to full dementia or full Alzheimer or whatever his cognitive situation is, but he seems to be rapidly getting to the point where it's going to be to the point where he can't remember what happened yesterday, or he's not aware of the people around him. And that's it. He's moving there pretty rapidly over his presidential campaign. I mean, this has been something that's his mental decline has been kind of, it only seems to have, started to happen about 2 years ago, because prior to that, any kind of interviews or he seems completely with it, completely there. And it's only these last 2 years or so that it started to show up, and it's starting to increase in how often it occurs. But I think the more he goes out and does public opinions or public appearances and stuff like that, the more noticeable it is. And this is again why they've been trying to downplay his public appearances. They've been limiting it. They've been trying to say, oh, it's because of COVID and all of this sort of stuff. But it seems more and more apparent it's because even on these interviews, they see these things. They're like, oh, it's not just the things. He is not able to keep his mind on task and on the sentences he's making, on the arguments he's building. And those things, they're creeping in. He's not fully gone, but it's becoming, like right now, it's something like 70-30 from what I can see. Is like 30% of the time he is in a fog, he's dazed and confused and not sure what's going on. And but, you know, talk about like 2 years ago, that was probably like 5%, maybe 8% or something like that. And it's gone up to like 30-ish% now. It's like a third of the time, Joe Biden's not there. He's not following his own sentences. He's not following his own train of thought. And I was like, yeah, all of us kind of have those moments where we have a brain fart or a brain fog, or we lose our train of thought. But it's, you're talking about that 1 to 5% range. And it's like, okay, yeah, it happens sometimes, but it's not all that common. You can have conversations for, hundreds of hours, and out of those hundreds of hours, maybe you lost your train of thought, or maybe you said something that was rambling and didn't go anywhere. Maybe you did that 5 minutes out of this 100 hours. And I'm sure you can find me rambling and losing my train of thought in these streams, but it's like 95 to 99% completely coherent, building arguments, following my own train of thought. And you can, my mind is working before my mouth speaks. Joe Biden, it used to be the way where you could tell his mind was working before his mouth spoke. He was thinking, reacting, delivering a response. And then there was that, about 5% of the time where it was a goof or a gaffe, or he didn't think things through, or whatever the case may be. And then you start to see that grow and grow and grow. And now it's like he did like 3 appearances this week, and all 3 of them he's made some kind of gaffe. Well, I mean, the third one is not necessarily a gaffe, but a really stupid thing. And I think that's a stupid. So both of these, the other two, that like the 1.2 billion clip, and then this talking about blacks in this clip, those happened this week. And that's on top of all the other insane things that he's said. Like there's entire montages of him saying stupid or crazy or racist things, or things that he doesn't get to the end of, which are rambling sentences. And then those two things these 2 clips that I showed you were from this week. But the craziest thing I think he's done this week is he picked Kamala Harris as his running mate. Kamala Harris is a Democratic VP nominee. What? I mean, I guess there's the name recognition, but that's about it. She is Hillary 2.0 with a paint job. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the clips or whatever of her doing that ha ha ha, a nervous, annoying laugh, the same way Hillary Clinton does that cackle. Same way that Hillary Clinton did. It's the, I don't know what's going on, ha 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 ha. Her face is smiling and she's laughing, but in her eyes you can see the sheer panic. It happens. It's a nervous reaction to a situation where she's caught off guard, or an unexpected territory where she didn't know what's going to happen, or she's getting she's like, oh, I didn't expect, people to take this seriously, or to be attacked on this, or how dare they, sort of. So not only does she have that really annoying, I'm basically Hillary Clinton, the black model, or I'm Hillary Clinton with a black paint job. That's everything about her screams corruption. Everything about her screams insincerity in what she's saying. Everything about her seems just say what I have to do to get elected. Pretty apparent with her. I was smoking weed in college while she was going. So the college she was in was law school. Yeah, she was smoking weed and listening to Snoop Dogg 2 years before he had his album, or Snoop Dogg and Tupac, years before their albums actually came out. And then, while she was studying how to put people behind bars for using drugs, and that was one of the criticisms against her. But the only reason Biden picked her is, oh, she's a woman of color, right? And that's what he promised. He's like, oh, my vice president pick is gonna be a woman, probably of color. That was his claim, for his doing things right. Yeah. So, okay, so Biden is clearly losing his mind, and people have been saying this for months, if not years. Biden is a placeholder president. He's not going to be running his own campaign, and this is something Trump has been talking about. It's like, yeah, even though, like, the guy is not with it, he's not the leader of his movement. He is not in charge. He is not making decisions. Other people are making decisions for him. Other people are writing his tweets, making statements on his behalf. He is not the leader. He is going to be a puppet president, and the people around him are going to be making decisions. But more importantly, now that Kamala Harris is his vice president pick, Kamala Harris is basically the de facto presidential nominee of the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris, who couldn't even make it amongst the Democratic candidates on her own, right? How far did she make it? Before her campaign ran out of money, it's like she was not in the top 4. She was not in the right. When did Kamala Harris drop out? Let's see. Let's see. She withdrew her candidacy in December, right? Okay. So how many candidates were there in January? She withdrew in December. Okay, so there was 29. Okay, so this isn't January, but by February, it was Biden, Sanders, Warren, Bloomberg, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, and Gabbard. So she did not make the top 7 of Democrat candidates. Like, maybe she was in the top 8. I don't think so. I think she was in the top 10. But she wasn't even in the top 5 of Democrat candidates. She dropped out in December. Let's see. So she dropped out before. Okay, so here's the order. Kamala Harris dropped out. After her, Julian Castro dropped out in January. Marianne Williamson dropped out in January. Booker dropped out in January. Delaney dropped out in January. So she was not even in the top 10. Because there was 7 plus Delaney plus Booker plus Marianne Williamson. That's the top 10 in January. And then it goes, Castro, Harris. Oh, and these 3 dropped out like a day apart. Joe Sestak? Who the hell is that? Was he was running for president? I don't know who that guy. I don't think I've ever seen his name. And then Steve Bullock. Does anybody remember that guy? So at least she was somewhat rememberable. out of the others that were running. Like so she didn't, she wasn't as bad as O'Rourke, uh, Beto. She wasn't as bad as Tim Ryan. Those dropped out before her, but she's with the dregs of the people who ran for president on the Democrat side. She's like the C team, not even the B team, and that's apparently Joe Biden's pick for president because he's not actually going to be president. I mean, he'll be president in name only, while Kamala Harris basically takes over and runs the country. That's what it's more than likely going to end up being. And I think for one reason or another, during Joe Biden's first term, he is going to step down. I think he's gonna. I mean, if you look at Reagan during his second term, Reagan was more with it at the start of his second term than Joe Biden is right now. And then Reagan, before his 4 years were up, I think it was the last year or maybe last year and a half of his second term, that's when he went on to full dementia and his wife had to basically step in and take his place. Now that might be a possibility as well, because there is precedent for that. And it might be the case where really you're not voting for Joe Biden, you're voting for Jill Biden and a Kamala Harris ticket. And while Jill Biden is not the elected president, she might be acting on Joe's behalf, almost kind of running the country in Joe's name. But I would think eventually Joe would drop out, or say I can't, I would like to, or he's gonna say something about medical emergency or something along those lines. Step down. Kamala Harris is gonna take his place, and then who knows is gonna be her vice president replacement. But yeah, and that it's what I see is this is such a terrible pick, because it looks like more likely than not the United States. So if Joe Biden were to win, the United States is going to get its first female president. I mean, unless you count Obama, never mind. That's again, that's not that's not legit. That is a conspiracy theory. No, but as far as we know, he was male, and then it's just the first lady we're not so sure about. Anyway, that's tinfoil hat conspiracy stuff, but it is funny and interesting. But we could have Kamala Harris as the first female president, but she won't have been elected. She'll be kind of like the Gerald Ford, right? I mean, I don't know anybody who looks at Gerald Ford as this great president and like, oh yeah, he's my favorite of the 45. Well, technically 44, right? The 44 people who have been president. Yeah, Gerald Ford is my number one, man. He's awesome. I don't know, but that's what, if Kamala Harris gets into the presidency that way, wow, that is it's kind of like it's really bad as far as, women who want to run for president. Like, oh, see, we can have a woman president. And it's like, yeah, but that's how she got in. It wasn't earned. She didn't deserve that position. She was handed it to her by somebody else. That does not bode well for the country or for women in general. Now, if you had someone like Nikki Haley, or I think eventually Candace Owens, whenever she's, when she meets the age criteria, I think she's going to make a run for it, and I think she's going to make a really good run for presidency. I find it very hard to think that she wouldn't be able to, grab a top slot. I mean, or at least be in the top 3 as far as a Republican candidate when she does run. So when she eventually does, I mean, yeah, she would have my support. As far as, other women, I think could run for president and have a, either make it, either win the nomination and possibly get the night, win in the not just the nomination for the party, but actually win. So I think Candace Owens is one of those women. I think Nikki Haley, if she ran, I think she could get clinch the Republican nominee probably, or nomination. I don't know if she could necessarily win the country. Trying to think of who else would be kind of that. I mean, more likely than not, I don't think the U.S. is going to have a female president voted in for a long time. It's not necessarily because women can't do that job or won't be good at that job. I just think in general, when you're talking about leadership roles, men tend to dominate that. And I think considering you're trying to find the best person for the job, if you're not voting based on gender, more likely than not, it is going to be a man to fill that position. I mean, that's just, that's sexist or that biology. I'm like, it's the mindset that most males have. And again, a lot of people attribute this to testosterone, because testosterone is not just violence and rage, but it's also a competitive nature that comes about biologically. And Jordan Peterson talked about this when he was talking about this personality test and breaking it down into 16 different aspects. And he's like, men dominate these categories. And you're talking about, and all these categories that would make somebody a good leader, well, men dominate those personality types. I'm not saying that a woman couldn't, but it's very unlikely that you would find it's kind of the same way with strength, right? The strongest woman in the world, I don't know who exactly that would be, and especially with these transgenders being individuals, dominating female sports, if you consider those females, never mind, I'm not going to. But if you took the strongest biological woman in the world, I don't think Ronda Rousey is actually that, but let's say you took Ronda Rousey, she'd be probably able to overpower or beat somebody in a strength competition, or beat a man. Probably 70 to 80% of men would be beaten by Ronda Rousey in a strength competition of whatever nature. But then you'd still have 20% of men that could beat her, and she wouldn't have a chance against those guys. It's similarly, I think somebody who is a strong, good leader who is female, they might be better than 80% of men at leading a country. I mean, what Margaret Thatcher is one of the best leaders the UK has ever had. The Iron Lady. There are certain women that fit that model, or that need, that have the ability to lead and lead well. But when you talk about there's still going to be 10 to 20% of men who would embody those traits required for leadership, even more so than the best woman at that. It's just, it's very, and maybe I'll get in trouble for this video, I don't know, but it's not based on sexism or patriarchy or that sort of thing. There are biology plays a key factor in the traits that members of each sex display. That members of each sex display or have as attributes. I was kind of mixing display and attributes to make distribute. Anyway, and it's very much based on the differences that testosterone create and the differences that estrogen create. But there's also that biological factor that women tend to be more emotional, because that helps them in the task of motherhood. When it comes to raising children, mothers are the ones that protect and baby the children, provide for them. They are actually the source of nutrition, given breast milk and all that sort of things. Whereas the dads are usually responsible for making sure the child goes out and actually does something, gets injured, eats dirt, gets the wind knocked out of them, something. within a controlled, safe environment. Granted, they're not saying, "Oh yeah, just go and stick your hand on this fire," or they let them do dangerous things that they know isn't going to kill them or permanently injure them, but they know it's like, well, yeah, the kids got to get hurt. They got to learn. They got to experience things for themselves. But oftentimes, the 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 mother, their desire is to shield the child from anything that could possibly cause them harm. And so it's those balance of those two. It's like, well, the dad is like, hey, you got to do some dangerous stuff. You got to, and sometimes the dad can go overboard in that and be like, oh, come on, it's fine. They're not gonna, and then they're doing something that is really dangerous that might end up with somebody getting dismembered. Sometimes the dads are too casual with that, and it requires the mom holding back and like, no, we're not doing this. This is too dangerous, sort of thing. And then sometimes it's like the mom is saying, climbing a tree in the front yard is too dangerous. I remember an instance where I was at my uncle's house and I was climbing up this tree. And it's like, it's a regular tree. And for some reason, my aunt started freaking out, and it was like, "Oh, that's too dangerous." And she's like, "Oh, you gotta come down." I'm like, "Dude, I'm what?" I guess I was pretty high up there, but I was a very good climber. It's not like I was out there monkey wrenching, hanging by my arms off of a tree. I can understand how that's dangerous, but I was in a secure position and it was a very easy tree to climb. There was all kinds of handholds. The bark was I was at no danger of falling out of the tree. Like, provided that the tree branch didn't completely break off or get struck by lightning or something like that. It's very unlikely I would have fought. And I climbed down from the tree, no problems. But she was freaking out because she thought it was a dangerous situation. Everybody else, like all the other, older cousins and stuff, I didn't hear them saying anything. And, like, oh, that's dangerous. Bunch of older guys who were in their teens, and I think I was like, might have been 8 or 9, maybe 10, somewhere in that range, and some of my other cousins are, 6 or 7 years older than me. Yeah, they didn't care, and I can't remember if my uncle was there or not, or if there was an adult male, but as far as I know, I remember her freaking out and be like, yeah, that's, that's nothing. Like, this was a very safe situation, and she's freaking out about it, and that's what I was like, okay, yeah, that's kind of the natural reaction that women have. It's like, oh, don't do that, that's dangerous, stay away from that, protect them from everything. Whereas, it's the, men are kind of like, oh yeah, go out and do that, conquer that tree. You gotta, you're building up your self-esteem, you're building up you're showing what you can do, you're doing something, and not everything you do in life is without danger, is without risk. Sometimes you have to do things that are risky. It's building that, and it's the balance between the two that make a well-rounded individual. But like I said, but if you're talking about a woman whose natural inclination is to protect people from all harm, that means they're more likely going to have policies that is like, we got to protect everybody from danger. Oh, we got to protect them from their own mistakes. Or don't allow them to make mistakes. And that's what we're seeing a lot from these democratic policies, a lot from these leftist policies. Oh, yeah, we got to make sure that people don't suffer from their own bad decisions. We got to make sure that all of this is protected and they're all coddled. And that does not make a well-rounded individual. That makes somebody who's entirely dependent. And the devouring mother, what's that called? Stereotype? No, what's the word I'm looking for here? No, stereotype is adequate. Trope. That's the word I'm looking for. The devouring mother trope. Or cliche. Also would work. Where they protect the child so much that the child is enfeebled and entirely reliant on the mother and can't do anything on their own. And when the mother is out of the situation, well, the child's not equipped for life without a protector, without somebody providing them everything. They're not a well-rounded individual, and oftentimes they either become, if they are somebody who's in a position of power, like say a prince or, an aristocrat type, or whatever, they abuse those around them. they mistreat those who they have authority over. But if they're not in a position of power, and if they're just some nobody, and the mom treats them like that and coddles them, well, I guess even if they're not some kind of somebody in authority, sometimes that creates like your Jeffrey Dahmer serial killer type. I mean, it's if you look at serial killers, there's a lot of that. What was that not Jordan Kemper? What was that guy's name? No, something Kemper, right? Not BTK. Klemper? Something along those lines. Can't remember his exact name, but the character from Mindhunters, the big guy with glasses who's all gentle, and he's talking about the mistreatment that his mother had, and that's that devouring mother syndrome, and he became a serial killer, went around killing women and raping their corpses. And he talks about why he did that, and he would have gotten away with it for years, but according to his own admission, he turned himself in, and he was actively trying to get caught, and was surprised that the police were so inept at catching him. On all these instances, he finally just basically like here's the smoking gun. I'm coming to you with red hands. Catch me, or I'll do it again. But the devouring mother, it creates individuals like that, and individuals like that who become serial killers or who become rapists or serial rapists and stuff like that. Many of them have that traumatizing experience with a over-controlling, overprotective mother. And if you're talking about creating an entire society where you've got a woman president in charge and making all these decisions, implementing all these policies, directing the country to have these controlling, suffocating rules, they're going to create an entire society of either wimps or people who lash out and they rebel so hard against that control that they go overboard and become these monsters. All right, man. So that was spent almost an entire hour on that one topic. I was hoping this would be a little shorter. So this next one is actually pretty interesting, but man, I'm gonna try to keep it short, but I don't know if I can because this is a very, very bizarre topic. All right. So apparently, The Matrix is a trans story. So I've heard a couple of people comment on this, and a lot of them were comparing this to J.K. Rowling and Dumbledore was gay the whole time. Whether that meme after reading the story, spoiler, or no, plot twist, you were gay the whole time reading Harry Potter. And by the way, Hermione was never supposed to be, or was never white. And like, no, it definitely says in your books that she was white. It describes her complexion. Changing the source after the fact to fit a narrative, and trying to make Harry Potter be more inclusive to SJW 10 years after it was written, sort of thing. So, The Matrix came out in 2003? No, I'm seeing it right there. It was released 1999. So The Matrix is 21 years old, or at least 20 years old, right? Because I don't know. Wait, no, 2021. 21, or maybe 20 in some months. I don't know. Anyway, it's at least 20 years old, and here is what used to be one of the Wachowski brothers, because when The Matrix came out, it said directed by the Wachowski brothers, but in more recent films that these two have worked on, it just became the Wachowskis, because both of them became trans. So two brothers, biological males, both became male to female transgenders. So, if I'm not mistaken, it was The Matrix, Then it was V for the Matrix sequels that shouldn't really have happened. And then the Wachowskis did V for Vendetta, Speed Racer, I think like Ninja Assassin, Cloud Atlas, and then they did Jupiter Ascending. But you can kind of see a degradation in their work over time, because The Matrix, the first one, really good. The sequels, I can understand they were just trying to jump on the bandwagon that they built with, jump on the hype train that The Matrix had built for them, and they probably didn't think the stories out as well as the original. So I can kind of see that being kind of a little bit of a cash grab, too forced, too soon, wasn't well thought out. But then V for Vendetta, they wrote it, and it was based on a graphic novel series, and that was really, really good. Speed Racer, I thought, was an excellent adaptation. While it didn't have the same philosophical, make you think, sort of, like V for Vendetta is very, very good. I mean, I've got buddies who they watch it kind of on every 5th of November because, I mean, just the idea that, oh man, it's okay. So I wish this was more about V for Vendetta, because there are a lot of parallels between the incidents in V for Vendetta and the current COVID situation, which I mean, man, if you put the two side to side, the parallels are astonishing, because it was exactly that type of situation that caused this authoritarian government to get into power in V for Vendetta. It was a pandemic that they had used to get that power, and then while they were in charge, they were experimenting on their own people, and it was kind of revealed throughout the film that the government was responsible for the pandemic to begin with. So there's a lot of I don't think the U.S. government was necessarily responsible for COVID situation, but I definitely think Chinese government had a big hand in that, and they did so as part of a power grab, because they are authoritarian communists. And I think the Democrats are trying to use this crisis to for the same reason, to take over and be authoritarians. Anyway, Speed Racer didn't have that same philosophical underlining, say that's the present in The Matrix and that's present in V for Vendetta. But I think it was an excellent kind of blockbuster, fun film. And if you remember the cartoons at all, there are all kinds of throwbacks and really cool visual effects and stuff like that. But after that, the Wachowskis started making just kind of the films that they made after that definitely declined in quality, and just overall, like Cloud Atlas was all right, but it definitely seemed kind of pretentious and seemed more style over substance. Whereas The Matrix had kind of like a very good blend of substance and style. Yeah, it was surface philosophy. It wasn't, it wasn't mind-blowing, actual, like, in-depth philosophy and stuff, but it was cool stuff to think about. Like there is no spoon. Is that air you're breathing sort of stuff. And like a lot of cool little, but that's all kind of surface level. What is real, what isn't? Are we all just brains in a jar type thing? Is taking those concepts and extrapolating on them. But it also had a lot of style to go with it, like that hallway scene where they're flipping through and picking up guns, just shooting up the columns and all that whole, walking through the metal detector, that entire scene, very stylistic, very cool. Introduction of bullet time and all that sort of thing. Very cool effects, very visually stylish, mixed with this philosophy. Very good combination. And more of their later stuff, it was all about style, not so much substance, and then it became more and more injected with SJW, just nonsense as their stuff, because eventually they made a series called Sense8. I think the concept behind Sense8 was really good. The implementation of it was all about orgies and trans people, and I tried to give it. I mean, the series. I mean, it kind of flopped. It did like one season and then a half a season or something like that, and then was like, yeah, nobody's watching this. Is meh. We're done. And I think it was a good concept, but there was so much dedicated to gay people, closeted gay people for some reason, and like, dude, it's 2000. Why are you, why is this? Oh, this is still a huge problem in 2000. And it's like, no, it's not. I mean, anyway, and then the trans person, and actually played by a trans actor, and whatever. Not gonna bother to try to figure out which way that went. But the whole series was like, I mean, it was supposed to be about this spy organization that's hunting down people like this, and all these people kind of share each other's abilities and mindset. But half of the time, it was all focused on sex, and for some reason, in a group of 8 people, there is a gay person, a trans lesbian. What was the other thing? But it's like, it was like 3 or 4 out of the 8 for some reason belong to the LGBT community, and you're like, 3% of the population, 3% of the population. But yeah, they have 3/8 of the representation in this show, or at least 2/8. I think 3/8. Oh man, not sure. I've got that like not a tickle, but something in the back of your sinus cavity, or it feels like something's stuffed up there. I don't know if that means I got a sneeze or what, but it's very uncomfortable at the moment. Sorry. So where was I? It's not. You can see this kind of degradation in the quality of work that comes out from the Wachowski brothers as they become the Wachowskis. And this is where I don't put on a deerstalker hat, but then this is the full on Professor Chaos aluminum or tinfoil helmet. I think they might have pissed off the wrong people with V for Vendetta. At least that's what it seems like to me. Because everything seemed fairly normal-ish. And then a few years after V for Vendetta, there was this huge shift in what they were talking about, whatever they were focusing their movies on and that sort of stuff. So I don't know if that was there all along, and maybe after they had made a name for themselves, they're kind of like, oh, well, now we're in a position where we can actually say these things. So I saw a bunch of people kind of breaking down, and Sargon went over a bunch of stuff on his video about it. There are things that I could see, like there was maybe a want to give a shout out to the LGBT plus community sort of thing, and the character of Switch apparently in the original draft was intended to be a man in the real world, and then when they go into the Matrix, they're a woman. That was kind of the original intent, and then the studio said, no, we're not going to do that, I guess for whatever reason. I don't think anybody in the audience would have minded or maybe even noticed. They might have been a little confused, but all the side characters were kind of inconsequential for the most part. In the end, with the exception of, Cypher was kind of a side character. I mean, the rest of them are kind of disposable. Nobody really cares. Even Mouse had somewhat interesting dialogue because he was trying to pimp out the lady in the red dress sort of thing. But they're in the film for maybe 5 minutes total, something like that. So the main characters are Cypher, Morpheus, Neo, and Trinity. The rest of them are kind of all, who cares? You're not paying too much attention to them throughout the film. Man. Yeah, it's like I gotta sneeze, but I can't. Very uncomfortable. Alright, what was was I saying there? So I think even if they had done what they wanted to do with Switch, nobody would have really noticed. So there's a lot of people like who are reading way too much into it. So what Sargon correctly pointed out is when you watch The Matrix, there are general philosophical truths that are present there. And this is why this is kind of, even though this film is over 20 years old, the taking the red pill has become a common trend or a like an adage, or it has become a colloquial. It's kind of it's not just an internet meme. It's taking the red pill is become synonymous with going for the truth, even when the truth might hurt or is. Okay, so let me break this down. So the idea in The Matrix, Morpheus gives Neo a choice of the blue pill, where he could take the blue pill and he can stay in the Matrix, or he could take the red pill and see the world as it really is. He tells him like this is, well, I don't remember the exact words he used, but it's the idea that something's not quite right with the world you're living in. It's fake. And if you want to know the truth, you take the red pill. And he tells him, like, the red pill, you can't come back to once you go, once you take the red pill, you can't go back to the world as you know it. This is going to change. This is going to change everything about how you perceive the world. Now, when Sargon was talking about this, and what Willie Wachowski here talks about, for some reason, is the idea that Neo is someone dealing with their own trans status. Because, well, people have been retroactively analyzing this and saying, well, the bad guy, Agent Smith, keeps calling him Mr. Anderson, but he goes by the hacker code name Neo, which is an anagram for one. But if you watch like the other people theorizing about the film, Neo wasn't the one, Agent Smith was the one. Anyway. But so the idea that apparently what they're saying now is that Neo was somebody who's dealing with their trans status. That's why they, and Mr. Anderson is dead naming this trans person. But it doesn't make sense because Neo takes the red pill and is taken out of the Matrix, out of an area where he's able to live a comfortable life, into an area where everything is obliterated, everything is destroyed, there is no civilization, there's no... humanity is in hiding at the center of the earth, sort of thing, and they're being attacked and hunted down by these robots. Everything is desolate, everything is gross, and he gave up what was the fantasized version to live in the horrible, or he was living in an idealized society and chose to live in a realistic but not ideal reality. Which, that seems very much to contradict what trans people are doing. It's kind of like the opposite of what the Matrix is talking about. It's like, because the Matrix is the delusion, is the fantasy. Reality sucks. Harsh reality you don't want to deal with. You have to deal with, but people who go back into the Matrix, they don't want to deal with it. But the thing is when Neo goes back into the Matrix, it's like, wait, but if leaving the Matrix and taking the red pill is the analogy for being trans, so the Matrix thinks, tells him that there's a binary and he's a man, and he comes out, if you're following this analogy, right, if that's the analogy they're trying to make, comes out of the Matrix where he can be his true self, as the trans people are trying to say, he goes back in there. He goes back into the illusion, and when he's back in the illusion, he has superpowers. How does that work as a trans allegory? You might have had something in just leaving the Matrix, and I'm like, okay, I could kind of follow that, but how does this analogy still apply? Going back into the Matrix, being able to do whatever you want in the Matrix, can trans people do whatever they want because of their trans status in the illusion of the binary? No, because that's kind of isn't that the cry of the trans people, is that they don't get treated like normal, they get mistreated, or they get oppressed because of their trans status. I thought that was the position. It's not the, and I mean, it seems pretty odd that there would be this high suicide rate amongst people who are transgender when basically they're Neos, right? They have superpowers. They can go in and do whatever they want within the illusion that other people believe. They have reality because they live their own, they get to be their true selves. And it's like, I'm not seeing how this analogy quite flows. The analogy most people took was this general concept of you're being told a lie, you're living in an illusion, you're shown the harsh reality. And this, again, going back to V for Vendetta, it's a very similar concept being explained in V for Vendetta. They're the next work they did after the Matrix series. Because the main character there, I mean, other than V, was Eve, and she was buying into the propaganda, the narrative of the authority that had control over, the chancellor in that film had over the society and telling them what was true. And the whole story, and then there's also this detective that's doing the research into V, and he's finding out we've been lied to about this whole situation. We've been lied to by our own government. He's coming to the harsh reality instead of the illusion of everything being normal, everything being in order, everything being nice, everything being controlled, everything being, crime is down, and we no longer have to worry about, mass panics, and we no longer have to worry about this prison populations, and, everything is fine, and this is the way the world should be. But under the surface, there's this, that's all a lie, and you got the truth that needs to be exposed, and the truth is harsh and it hurts. I can understand that being an analogy for the trans situation, so that theme is there in the Matrix, but in the Matrix they go back in. In V for Vendetta, they just destroy the illusion. By the end of the film, the people have rose up against the illusion, and they're like, no, we all knew this was fake, this was a lie, this was a propaganda, and we were waiting for somebody to stand up against it so we could join them. But we thought it was just us, and now we see how many of us there are. You can't hold us back anymore. You can't force us into this oppression anymore. You can't force us into your illusion. So very similar thematically, but I can't see how the Matrix is supposed to be a trans. Because the idea is we're being lied to by a controlling power, and we need to break that control and come out of it. That is a universalized trend. That is something that you can broaden up to it's like, oh, you've been lied to by, a lot of people will say this sort of things, like they were a member of a religion, and then they took the red pill and they became atheists. That's okay. I disagree with them. When I went through, I don't know if I'd say it was a phase, but when I was an atheist, because I was like, oh yeah, I was kind of lied to when I was growing up, and people kept telling me what I thought was the truth. Well, what they're pointing out is that what I was taught as a kid was incorrect. I didn't realize that doesn't mean that the Bible was incorrect. It was the way I was being taught as a child was incorrect. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, if you actually understand that a lot of people misunderstood what the Bible's actually saying, they have a lot of concepts that are not actually supported by the Bible, well, yeah, it's going to be easy to poke holes in that and pretend that, oh, the whole thing is a lie. Anyway, so I don't think the Matrix holds up to the trans analogy. I think V for Vendetta might. I could see that being more of an allegory for a trans situation wrapped up in a, revolutionary versus the oppressive government. And I could see that being an analogy. But when they say the Matrix is that analogy, the analogy doesn't flow correctly. It doesn't work. There are too many disparities that don't make sense with that view of what the Matrix was. I don't think I had anything else to say on that topic. But this was like this clip from Netflix interviewing Wachowski on this. And it just came out with August 4th or whatever. But I have it paused here at a time in this interview, and I don't know why they left this in, because this is so bizarre, and this kind of shows that no, what this person was saying about the Matrix. Now, I agree with Sargon of Akkad when he says there might have been subtle references to being trans that the Wachowskis put into the Matrix when they didn't realize they were trans, because the Wachowskis didn't transition. I think this Lily Wachowski was the first to transition, and then the other one, I don't remember the name. But so think Lily Wachowski transitioned in 2013, and then the other one in 2016. And it's like, that's 14 years after the Matrix. So there's the possibility that both of them had in the back of their minds that something wasn't quite right, and they had this, and so there was little subtle hints at the trans that they put in the film without realizing, like their subconscious was putting those things into their medium. And after the fact, you can kind of see that and spot those little references or hints and stuff like that, but it would be very subtle, it would be very under the, but a lot of people are acting as if it's an overt analogy or allegory for the trans condition. And I'm like, because one of the posts was talking about bullet time being a, trans seeing themselves as dual personality sort of thing. I'm like, no, bullet time was, and Sargon made that point as well, is bullet time was slow motion. It's slow motion, and slow motion existed before bullet time, but what bullet time did, it was slow motion while the shot goes around the character. That's bullet time. That was brand new, and the way they did that is staging all these cameras in a circle, and it would go from flash a picture, flash a picture, flash a picture, flash a picture, and it would go around in this circle really, really quick. So that way you get this slow motion, and the way you do slow motion is you take more shots per frame and then you play them at a regular rate. So rapid fire photos from these cameras around in a circle that give you that really cool wrap-around slow-mo effect. None of that has to do with duality. But people are trying to make those, oh, see, this is trans because of this. It's insanity. And the insanity, I think, is best summed up by Lil Wachowski themselves here.
I think in our transness, we are always trying to, in queerness, incorporate as many things as possible. It's just like trying to visualize within, a much larger, infinite scope of the imagination.
What? What was any of that supposed to mean? That sounded like a Biden ramble. Right? 51 seconds, right?
Yes, we are always trying to, in queerness, incorporate as many things as possible. It's just like trying to visualize within, a much larger infinite scope of the imagination.
What does any of that have to do with trans or queerness? It's like, yes, we were just trying to make a broad scope of imagination. We're trying to incorporate as many things as we could into one thing. What does that have to do with trans or queerness? Because they talked about mixing Western, because there's the standoff between Agent Smith and Neo in the train station when he first starts, he's beginning to believe, right? When they have that fight scene, that is pretty epic. There are elements of a Western kind of standoff there. And then there's situations like, so they mix anime and sci-fi, and it's a blend of all of these, and philosophy is blended in there. It's a blend of all these different things. That's cool. What does that have to do with trans or queerness? Or the LGBT anything? And here's Lily Wachowski saying, it's like, yeah, because of this. It's like, what does that mean? That anybody who's combining everything, like a, what is that, magical shopping arcade, Omnubashi, it's a anime, but it mixes a whole bunch of different genres together in this comedy that's goofy, and yeah, but it's a whole bunch of things all mixed together. So it's got RPG elements, and then there's, references to Gundam, and oh, I guess the creators of that must also be trans, because it's mixing all these different things in the, in the imagination, right? The infinite imagination. Does that mean Deadpool? Obviously, Ryan Reynolds is secretly trans and queer, because Deadpool pulls in all these pop culture references and comic books and just real life. It's got all of these references to things outside of Deadpool, and it's got all these mixing of genres, and that's kind of the intent of the Deadpool character. Breaking the fourth wall, talking about cinema films in general, while being in a film himself. Oh, but it's a mixing of all of these different things together, so obviously he's trans. It's because he's bringing in all these different elements that don't belong in a single contained universe. Yep, obviously Ryan Reynolds is trans. Anybody who makes, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, right? Obviously, everybody involved in that was trans as well, because it's got a mixture, it's bringing rock and roll and anime-inspired comic book stuff and video games and, techno music, but also grunge pop. And, yeah, that film must also be, it's got to be trans, because it's the infinite imagination. It's got a freaking P meter with Zelda music, so it's obviously trans. And queer. And you got to throw that in there after the fact, because you just remember that you got to throw that buzzword in there. Ridiculous. Yeah, I think if they wanted to say there was an allegory, I could see it with V for Vendetta more so than The Matrix. But the entire analogy breaks down. And I know they try to put little things throughout their films and references to, granted, V for Vendetta, there was a huge, or not a huge, but there was a fairly lengthy section of the film that is dedicated to two lesbians being oppressed by the government. And it seems very out of place in the pacing of the film, because it's like a film within a film. It's great. I think it's only like maybe a 5 or 8 minute section, but considering the rest of the film, it's very dark and bleak, and you can see it's kind of this, resistance-esque film. But that whole section is all poppy and uplifting and running through a field of flowers, and it's, describing passionate, relations between two women and stuff like that. It's like, it seems very out of place, but it makes sense within the film, because it's showing, how oppressive this government is, because it's, cracking down on people's freedoms and liberties to live their lives, to love how they want to love. And it's like, even though I kind of disagree with that lifestyle, I think people should be free to do that, and there shouldn't be any kind of laws or government preventing them from doing that. People should be free to make mistakes. Okay. Let's wrap that around to what I was saying before about women wanting to overprotect people, protect them from their own mistakes. Well, a lot of people treat government in the same way, and that government should be preventing people from making their own mistakes. And in the past, it was the religious, supposed right-wingers. I don't see how you could be right-winger when, in my mind, right-wing should be focused on individual freedom. But there was a lot of people who were supposedly conservative Christians and supposedly right-wing who wanted to use the government to crack down on the individual liberties of other people in order to protect them from their sins. We see this in the drug war. We see this in when banning of certain speech was first presented as an idea of something that should be done for the good of society, was presented by Christian radicals. Or I should say supposedly Christian radicals, because I think true Christians operate in a way more closely to the way a lot of Christians or people who call themselves Christians act, in that they tell people, I disagree with what you're doing, you can do that, but I'm not going to be a part of it, but I'm going to say, hey, that's what you're doing is wrong, but I'm not going to stop you from doing it. If you want to change your actions, come to church with us, come read your Bible, come learn about what you should be doing, sort of thing. But in the past, it was like, it was the religious people who were like, oh, we need to, ban drugs, and we need to ban pornography, and we need to ban this rock and roll music, and comic books are corrupting the children, and Harry Potter is teaching people about witchcraft, and Pokemon is, demon possession or something like that. I don't remember, silly stuff growing up. They talked about Dungeons and Dragons leading to witchcraft and the worship of Satan. That's kind of the insanity. We need to protect people from mistakes. They can't make any mistake. No, the Bible says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. If you're training your child in the way they should go, you have to let them live their own lives, and they will do the right thing. Training up a child doesn't mean, block them from doing anything that's evil or bad. And it's very, in my mind, very against the message of the Bible, because it's like God allows people to make mistakes that will result in them dying, that will result in them falling into sin, will result in them not being saved. God allows people to do that. He has the ability to stop that, to control people, to say, no, you're gonna follow my rules, my commandments, whether you like it or not. He has the power to do that. He chooses not to. He chooses, because it makes no sense if everybody has to follow God's will and has no ability. What is the purpose? You can't be good if you are forced to be good. Being good has to be a choice. You have to have the choice between good and evil, right? And the original sin, eating from the tree of knowledge and good and evil. Well, now you have the knowledge of good and evil. Choose good. God gave us that choice. God continues to give us that choice. But supposed Christians are saying, we know better than God, because we're going to take away your choice to do evil. Take away your choice to do sin. Block these things, prevent them by law. Well, then you don't have a choice, do you? If you're going to block a choice, and so that way, then that way, the only things you can do is choose good. Then it's not a choice, and it doesn't mean that you are good at your heart. This is the same problem that Jesus continually pointed out in the Pharisees, is they had all of these laws, and they were following the laws. They were following the laws, but their heart was not in the right place. Their heart was not after God. And people who impose these laws in order to prevent people from doing the wrong things, like, we've got all these laws, and people who obey the laws, they can't, all of these things that are sins, we've banned them. by law. So if you break the law, well, then you're sin and you're evil. But if you follow the law, and it's like, but your heart is not in the right place. You're following the law simply so that way you don't get punished. So that way you don't suffer the bad consequences. You're not actively trying to do things to help other people, which is the call Jehovah has made in the Bible. He talks about love the Lord your God and love thy neighbor as thyself. Those are not new commandments that Jesus introduced. He's quoting from the Old Testament. He's quoting those two commandments from the Old Testament. Those are not new. Jesus didn't establish those as new commandments. The Jews were called to love their neighbors, to show them the right way to do things, not to force them by law to do the right thing. So anybody who's using government to try to control other people, to prevent them from sinning, so they don't... their idea is, well, if they're going to go to hell for using drugs, or they're going to go to hell for having homosexual sex. It's like, well, first of all, we're going to completely ignore that hell is not... hell, the way that they describe it, is not the way the Bible describes it. Alright, sorry, I said gonna ignore that, and my mind goes all to the... It's like, I'm trying not to go off on that tangent, sorry. But what good would it do if somebody lived their life according to the law, but they did not have Jehovah's will in their heart, and they would go to hell anyways? Because they are not doing what is required according to the New Testament, and according to even the Old Testament, in order to receive salvation. They'd be just like, oh, well, I didn't do anything that was against the law. That doesn't necessarily make you a good person. And this is especially true in the United States. There are a lot of people who do very shady, terrible things that aren't against the law. There are people who, like Kickstarter programs that start up and GoFundMes that are created just for the purpose of taking other people's money and then going away. And it's like, yeah, you took these people money, but all you have to do is claim, well, we didn't actually release the product, so you don't get anything. That's not illegal. Somebody invested in your company went broke or whatever. That's not illegal. But there are a lot of people who use these kinds of systems to take money away from people with no intention of creating a product, with no intention of creating a real company. But then they're like, oh, well, the company ran out of money. Meanwhile, they pocket whatever the difference is. Company goes bust. Actually, it's kind of like the producers. There are people who make their money by getting people to invest in a company that has no real products, has no nothing. Company goes bankrupt. The people who invested in that company don't make anything. But meanwhile, the CEO of the company, they got a salary the whole time the company is in existence, or they took their money out of that investment after a bunch of people had bought in after them. Right? So it's, I don't know if this is, it's okay. Who is this? It's 50 Cent. So 50 Cent, what he did was not illegal. I would say it's very unethical, very immoral, but it was not illegal. 50 Cent invested in something that was in a penny stocks. It was something with a gun manufacturer or something like that. It was, it's really cheap stocks. Then he goes on Twitter and talks about how this stock is awesome and it's gonna explode within the next few weeks. It's gonna, their stock price is gonna jump. And everybody who is a follower of him on social media, they're like, oh, these are penny stocks? All right, I'll jump in. I'll jump in on this investment. Within hours, I think, or within weeks, I've talked about this before. It was within a very short amount of time. That stock went from a few cents per share to a few dollars per share. And when it was about, I think, around $10 or so, 50 Cent pulled his investment out of that company. That company didn't do anything. They weren't creating some new product that was, all those people who invested in that penny stock, if they sold out when it was at its high, they made money. But if they bought in just because, well, then they lost money. But what he did was not illegal. And it was not insider trading. It was not perfectly valid. It wasn't his fault that all these people didn't realize why you should be investing in a stock or why you shouldn't be investing in a stock. They were just like, oh, he's into this. All right, it's only going to cost me a couple of bucks. You know, it's only, you know, $10 there, $50 there, $100 there, something like that. No huge investment, but all those people invested, and what 50 Cent, you know, bought something that was, you know, when he bought in, it was a penny. I don't remember how many shares he bought or something like that. But if he bought like 1,000 shares or 10,000 shares, he spent a couple of dollars on it, right? Let's see. I'm trying to do the math here. Say he bought 1,000 shares for a penny each. That's what, $10, something like that. But then other people started buying in, and a lot of people started buying in all at once, and so he's, you know, maybe he spent $1,000 on shares or something like that, and so he's got 100,000 shares for a penny each, and then a bunch of people bought in, and that price went up to $1. Well, he just turned, you know, $1,000 into $100,000 in a matter of hours or minutes or however long it took to reach that point. And then he takes his money out, and everybody else is sitting there like, well, what do we do now? Some of them sold off when it was at a high, but some of them are going to be left holding nothing. They're going to be left holding shares in a company that nobody wants to buy because the company doesn't have anything. The company's not doing anything. It's a real company, but there's no reason that its stock prices should be that high. There's no dividends. There's nothing owning a share of the company actually gets you unless somebody else is willing to buy that share at a higher price. And because of the way 50 Cent did this, by broadcasting this on his social media, those other people were willing to buy shares at a higher price than when he bought in. And that's how he made money off of it. That may not have been his original intention either. But it's the idea that somebody can do, well, oh, I'm within the law, therefore I'm a good person. It's like, no. You can be a terrible, awful, evil a-hole, but have no criminal record whatsoever. And that's what the Pharisees and Sadducees were like, and that's what Jesus was talking about. And the religious authoritarian figures who were like, oh, we want to ban all of these evil, sinful activities. Well, they're the same thing. It's like you're going to have a bunch of evil-hearted people who are following the laws, who are doing good and not doing evil, but it's not because they want to do good and don't want to do evil. It's because they've put the law ahead of their true wants and desires. They should want to do good and be good people and help other people out to benefit society as a whole, to help their neighbor, love their neighbor as themselves, be generous to other people when they can, to make things, ease other people's burdens when they're able to. That's what they should want to do. But when everything is by the law, you are prevented from being a bad person. You get a bunch of people with evil, corrupted hearts like the Pharisees were, constantly criticizing people for breaking the laws or the traditions. Meanwhile, they were not doing their jobs of trying to get people who weren't following the laws or who weren't following God, who weren't following the scriptures. Those people, they weren't actively out there trying to get them into the church, trying to get them to change their lives, trying to get them to follow Jehovah's will. They weren't doing their job, which is why Jesus came by and said, yeah, I'm reaching out to those people. I'm doing the job that you should have been doing. All right. That's enough on that topic. Oof, almost 2 hours in. All right. So the rest of this is all pretty short, cool or interesting stuff. So not much commentary on my part for the rest of these.
Could I get a Doritos Locos Taco? Doritos Locos Taco. Colonel, what's the procedure?
That's a taco with a special shell, Snake, made not from an ordinary corn tortilla, but designed to evoke the famous tortilla chip, packed with extreme flavor. Substitute the shell and prepare the rest of the taco normally.
Got it. Excuse me, customer. There's both Cool Ranch and nacho cheese shells here. Which would you prefer?
Cool Ranch, please.
On it.
Alright, so that's the voice of Snake Solid, David Hayter. Some fan found him at a, I guess, food court or something like that, and got him to read a little script from Taco Bell. And there was a response video made.
Oh, dear brother, look at you working here at Master Miller's. What is this place? Taco Town? Tacos are us? Anyway, this uniform thing, you wear it very well, just like a big boy. And that hat, what is that supposed to be? Is that a taco on your head? Ah, very jaunty indeed. No, I won't be eating. No, I do have something for you, though, to eat. I brought it along. I'm just here to drive through the drive-through, you see. Here you are. There is some humble pie in there, as well as some crow. You can stick it in the microwave. All right, gotta go. See you, dear brother.
Okay. And that was the voice actor who does, obviously, Liquid Snake from Metal Gear Solid. So it's kind of cool. But this is from about almost 2 years ago, right? 2018. Don't know how I missed that, but that was kind of awesome. Alright, so here's the high quality H2O.
A group of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology researchers made a major breakthrough in the graphene-based desalination process. They were able to remove 97% of common salts in an energy-efficient way. The current reverse osmosis desalination technology is energy-intensive, and desalination plants' capital costs are high. By the year 2025, 14% of the world's population will experience water scarcity, which makes this discovery very important. Moreover, graphene-based filtration technology could come to your kitchen very soon. However, before getting into graphene-based desalination technology, let's see how the current RO desalination works. Consider this interesting experiment. Salty water and pure water transfer from the right side migrate to the left side in an attempt to balance the salt level concentration. This naturally occurring process is called osmosis. We definitely don't want this result. What we need is the exact reverse of this process. Water molecules from the left side should migrate to the right side. So, what can we do to get pure water? We can apply good pressure on the saltwater side. The increased pressure will force the water molecules in the salty side to migrate to the clean water side. Obviously, the semi-permeable membrane blocks migration of salt ions. This method is known as reverse osmosis. However, pumps require enormous amounts of energy to apply pressure on water, and the equipment costs make it difficult to build more desalination plants.
Alright, so that's reverse osmosis. That is currently the best way of purifying water that we have available to us. It removes the most impurities, leaves on the other side nothing but pure water. That's how you get most of your... Well, sometimes you can get what's called distilled water through other processes, but sometimes it's not just water. It'll have other impurities in there and that sort of thing. This, you get true distilled water that is nothing but H2O. There's no chlorine in it. There's no aluminum in it. Those are things that'll end up in your that end up in some distilled water. It'll say H2O and nothing else, but that they've got minor impurities in there. Sometimes they'll have a little bit of salt in there, salt residue or something like that, depending on the process used. Other times they'll have other contaminants like chemicals or the remainder of bacteria within the water. It's still considered distilled water because the parts per million is so small of these other contaminants. But reverse osmosis doesn't have those impurities. It is pure water. So, so What they're talking about right now is they found a way, same effect, using graphene sheets.
A lot of small bombardment and selective etching processes can fabricate desired pores in a graphene sheet. These holes allow water molecules to pass easily, while blocking salt ions. On an industrial scale, however, the position of the holes cannot be precisely predicted. Thus, it is impractical to use graphene as a filtration membrane for large-scale manufacturing. A good alternative for graphene is graphene oxide, which is formed by oxidized.
Alright, so let me go back to this. So this is what people have been saying, and this was what I was thinking, because as far as graphene being a water filter, this was the idea first proposed, because you can make the holes in the lattice there. They're big enough to allow water through, but nothing else. But like they mentioned here, the position of those holes is it's very difficult to get them in precisely where you want them to be, because the atomic bond between the graphene atoms, the carbon atoms in the graphene, are so strong. It's very difficult to get those precision holes that you would need. So they found
graphite.
an easier way to do it.
Later, these layers are exfoliated to get graphene oxide. Graphene oxide sheets are cheap and are easily mass-produced. One fascinating property of graphene oxide, which makes it ideal for desalination, is its hydrophilic nature, which means that water flows through it quickly. However, making pores on GO sheets via ion bombardment is not a practical solution. Another way to create pores is by stacking GO sheets together and tuning the distance between them. Let's test this newly made GO membrane for our desalination purpose. The water passes through the membrane automatically via capillary action. The observed result shows no salt permeation detectable for the 6.4 angstrom pore size. Because salt atoms have a larger diameter than water atoms, salts are blocked. Salt is present in seawater in an ionic state, as Na+ and Cl-. When these salt ions are in water, they hydrate. Put simply, as the ions are charged, they attract water surrounding them in concentric shells, thus increasing the salt ion's diameter. So the pore size of graphene oxide membranes is designed accordingly to block these hydrated ions. The salt-to-water molecules are bonded in covalent bonds, which are stronger than water-to-water hydrogen bonds. This difference in strength is why water-to-water molecules can break and permeate easily, whereas salt-to-water bonds are tougher to break and hardly permeate through a GO membrane. GO membranes are easy to fabricate on a larger scale compared to graphene membranes. Here's how GO membranes are fabricated. The mechanism get good GO sheets is immersed in water, 2 to 3 layers of water molecules to the pore size, which can then pores, causing it to swell. 2 to 3 layers of water molecules intercalate between pores, causing it to swell. This swelling increases the pore size, which can then permeate the salt atoms too. To overcome this problem, graphene oxide laminates are physically constrained from swelling by using Sti-Cast epoxy. Graphene oxide laminate and Sti-Cast epoxy are alternated in layers to form filtrating membranes. A typical RO membrane can remove up to 90 to 95% of salts, whereas the graphene oxide-based membranes can remove up to 97% of salts.
Okay. Well, I don't know why it says typical one. For the most part, reverse osmosis. Yeah, I was about to say, that's should be one of the... Oh, okay. Sorry. So, okay. Yeah, this is specifically salts. Sorry. Salts, for the most part, even through reverse osmosis, are not necessarily considered contaminants. Whereas reverse osmosis will keep things like metal flakes and metal atoms, talking about aluminum and tin that are sometimes found in water supplies, chlorine, what's the other one? Fluoride. So there are other chemicals that are found in water after it's been treated by facilities or going through pipes and various things like that, that the reverse osmosis process blocks out. So I think I was incorrect before when I was saying, you're getting pure water, because sometimes salts do get through the membranes when using reverse osmosis. So it's not guaranteed, but they get it's in a very small amount of salt on the other side. And a lot of places that do reverse osmosis, they get their water supply from freshwater sources as opposed to the ocean. So a lot of places you'll go to, like the Coke who does smart water, they get their water from streams and lakes in the area, or I think possibly from the what's that called? The treatment plants for water. What's that called? Starts with an R, but I'm drawing a blank on it right now. Refurbish. Why does refurbish keep coming in my mind? Man, I wish somebody else was here because they would know this. No, I keep thinking refurbish. That's the only word that comes to mind, but that's not correct. But the water, sometimes these Coke bottling plants or whatever water bottling plants will get their water from one of these that's your regular tap water, but they'll run that through a reverse osmosis machine. Then they'll get pure water because there is no salt inherent, or a very small amount of salt inherent. But what it's talking about is with these, what they're talking about the 90 to 95, they're talking about pumping water from the ocean, water that is extremely salty, and it's very salty to begin with, so you're likely to get salt on the other side of that reverse osmosis process. And there's a lot more water in the ocean than there is in rivers and lakes and all that sort of stuff. So if you're trying to make a adequate water supply for everybody, like you could do reverse osmosis pumps or whatever along streams and lakes and rivers and get your water that way, but then you'd eventually run out of that fresh water. There's a ton more water in our oceans that is salty. There's a ton more salt water. Like, I shouldn't say ton. There are the oceans make up 70% of the Earth's surface. That's all salt water. How much of this Earth's surface is represented by fresh water? 2%, something like that. Maybe it can't be more than 5%. You're talking about 70% of the surface of the ocean. That's not talking about all the underground, like just the depths of the ocean, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot more salt water than there is fresh water. A lot of reverse osmosis is done on fresh water to begin with, so the salt is not a problem. It's getting rid of the other impurities, which are a lot bigger than the salt molecule. Those are not likely to permeate the semi-permeable membrane. Sometimes salt gets through because it's larger than water on its own, but not by much. Compared to the other molecules that these membranes are designed to block out. All right.
Graphene oxide membranes, due to their high tensile strength and higher affinity to water, are perfect candidates for desalination. In RO plants, we need to reverse a naturally occurring process using external energy.
Yeah, so it's talking about, with reverse osmosis takes a lot of energy, but with these new graphene oxide layers and the way that they're doing it, you basically just have salt water on one side and an empty tank on the other side, and water will flow through that with little to no energy, with all the energy required in just, I guess, the manufacture and pumping the salt water into the reservoir, I guess. So I'm not sure, but the energy consumption should be, the energy consumption required for desalinating heavily salted content of water should be drastically different with this process. And I thought that was cool. And like I said, 95% or 97% salt free, and I'm fairly certain if you did this kind of in a staged process, like if you were to take the 97% pure water, run it through the graphene oxide process again, it would remove even more of the salt, and then you'd have, if you did this in layers of 10 times down, by the end you would get something like 99.9% pure water at the other end. Like eventually that would occur. Because as far as I know, what they're talking about here was merely just the proof of concept sort of thing that they're still working on this. But they have proven that it works. pretty cool stuff. Alright, it's almost 2 hours into this stream. Nobody's watching anymore, if they ever were watching to begin with. And we'll just move on to the ending clip, because I kind of did my rant before the oxide thing.
Being born without legs hasn't stopped me from doing the things that I want to do.
People just, they'd make fun of me because I didn't have legs.
The best way to deal with haters is to use the hate to lift yourself up. Your haters are your biggest fans, so use that to your advantage. My name is Zion Clark. I was born with a rare condition that caused me not to have legs. I was born with caudal regression syndrome. It is a very rare disease. 1 out of every 100,000 kids are born with it each year. Caudal regression syndrome is a rare disease that can cause a number of abnormalities in a baby. Like, it can be you have a portion of your spine missing, or in my case, I was born without legs. I lived most of my life through foster care up until about 16.
He came into my life when the caseworkers had reached out to me and said that they needed a placement for a young fellow. They bring Zion to my home some weeks later. Then it came to a point to where I just knew he was mine, and I just was so in love with him. And I approached him one day on the couch and I said, Zion, I know that I'm not your biological mother. And I asked him if I could get to be his mom. He said, yes, I want you to be my mom. I was like, well, let's do this. Let's do it.
The relationship with my mom is fantastic. She is the greatest woman I know, you know, and she wants what's best for me. She wants what's best for me and my sisters. She never once was gonna give up on me.
I mean, I was always a troubled kid during school, so.
Alright, I'm gonna pause the video right there. So he says he's born without legs, but it looks like he doesn't have, like, the lower half of his chest either. Like, stomach and intestines and liver and all that sort of stuff. How is that working? Like, this is a very... I still don't... But the crazy thing about it is, like, dude, his arms, he is built like a Terry Crews or something like that. He's built like a tremendous athlete, but he's just a torso. So I don't know how the rest of his spine and all that works. It might be the case where he has like a partial pelvis, and so he's got everything under that. But when he's sitting, I guess that would be called, like when he's not relying on his arms to hold himself up the entire time. That might be another reason why he's got to wheel himself around in the wheelchair all the time. But that might be his way of walking, is he's walking by his hands all the time. I don't think they really show him scooting around outside of the wheelchair shots and stuff like that. But so it might be the case that since he doesn't have like a regular, like, he doesn't just have legs, he also doesn't have a butt, so it might be the case where he has that lower spine, but it would be too uncomfortable if he was to use that, try to prop himself up by that. So what I'm thinking is he's got a little bit of the lower half of his body, but he has to rest on that, and so his ab muscles are kind of like constantly taut to keep him upright, but the lower half of his chest is kind of behind him to act as a anchor. I can't do. Trying to think of I don't have any. Okay, so like imagine, so like this is his torso. I mean, granted, that's not gonna work because that's not. And I don't have anything around to do. So what I think is he's kind of resting on his stomach when they're showing the shots of him just kind of sitting there and moving his hands and stuff. I think he's resting on his lower stomach, and that's just kind of what he's adapted to doing. But man, that is fascinating and just inspiring. The rest of this it's even cooler.
I mean, any little thing would make me mad. I just got in trouble for punching lockers or just back talking to teachers, Well, people just, they'd make fun of me because I didn't have legs, so they think I couldn't do something, or they'd be talking to me. So I just got tired of it, so I'd stop reacting and I'd just let them talk, and eventually they just started leaving me alone. School wasn't the greatest time for me, but by the time I was a senior, I was able to turn it around and get to college and start doing everything I wanted to do.
I started wrestling in 2nd grade. I could just go wrestle for a couple more hours, waste all my energy, and go home and just go to sleep. When I was really little, the first...
Okay, and you can see there on his back, so it's kind of like his... I don't know if his waist is permanently like that. I don't know if that's a result of his condition or the result of how he's adapted to living with no legs by constantly resting on his stomach and doing that, you know, since he was a child. That's become that's become how his spine has adapted to it. Very fascinating.
A few matches, I didn't know what to do, and neither did my opponent. Some kids were scared to wrestle me. I was scared to wrestle them. I didn't know what I was doing. I adapted my wrestling by a lot of trial and error. I spent years figuring out what would work, what didn't work, and there's a lot of things that don't work. But the things that do work, drill them over and over and over again until they're completely flawless, until somebody might know I'm doing it, but I'm going to do it anyways, whether they want me to or not. I am feeling great about a match. I train about